Welcome to the latest episode of Five on the Floor on the Five Reasons Sports Network. Thanks for joining us on your favorite podcast app, on Apple Podcasts, on Android, Spotify, or the Five Reasons YouTube channel. Make sure you subscribe to Off the Floor. Link is right here in the description. We're going to be putting more Heat content there than anybody's putting anywhere else. We promise you that. We're also going to be taking it from some places we used to put it so that we can create a community here on Off the Floor. So make sure you sign up, $2.99 per month. Stage shows are starting this week. Also, check out the great sponsors of the Five Reasons Sports Network, including Better Edge. That is with an O in it, betteredge.com. Legal in the state of Florida. What's the difference between this and other legal sports books? Well, you can find the line that you want because this is a sports betting marketplace and there's no VIG. That means you're not giving money to the books for nothing. Also, we run our contests there. We're running an NFL contest this week, giving away some merchandise. Again, betteredge.com. Use the code 5, that's the number 5, RSN. And now, today's episode.
Down to Biscayne.
Yikes. 5 on the floor. Ride for my dogs. Where here's the thing. You can check the score. Hustle hard, couple scars, wearing rubber frauds. Just like Butler said, you in trouble, y'all. Kept the flow playing. Got it all band. Y'all seen the block. Stop with one hand. And Pat, we trust. It's power, have the guts. We're here to bring the heat. Y'all can hang it up.
Welcome to Five on the Floor, a daily insider show on the Miami Heat and the NBA, featuring Ethan Skolnick, Greg Sylvander, and Alex Toledo, plus others from the Five Reasons Sports Network.
Welcome back to Five on the Floor. Here's today's floor plan. I'm Ethan Skolnick. You can follow me at Ethan J. Skolnick and at Five Reasons Sports. We got Greg Sylvander. You can follow me at Greg Sylvander. At some point in this episode, we may be joined by Alex Toledo as well. That's the best way to handle this, isn't this, Greg? Anyway, no, Alex didn't do anything wrong. It's just internet issues, so we understand those. By the way, we hope everybody stays safe over the next couple of days in South Florida and elsewhere as this storm is coming. We're going to try to provide as much Heat content as we can for you leading up to Media Day on Monday. I'll be there with Alex and Brady and maybe some others from the Five Reasons Sports Network. And then also I'll be heading to the Bahamas on Monday night to cover with our guy Timothy Bain in the Bahamas at Baha Mar, where the Heat will be holding training camp. So we'll be providing podcasts with direct interviews from the players. We'll try to get everybody on. We've done that before in some form or fashion. It's not like we're going to get a 20-minute sit down with Jimmy Butler, but we will get content from everybody on the roster by the time I get back from the Bahamas. We promise you that. If there's another storm, I may never come back from the Bahamas. Anyway, Greg, what we're going to get to today is others are providing content for us. We appreciate that. Yahoo Sports, Ben Rohrbach, has done something interesting where he's talked about different options for teams, right? So in a starting lineup, you have a first option, you have a second option, you have a third option. He says basically the second guy is kind of the player who complements the top option the best. The third guy is the guy who knows his role, and then you have complementary options beyond that and how they fit together in a starting lineup. And we were going to do this episode originally just on the number 2 option because that's the one that made the rounds today, with Bam Adebayo being ranked the number 4 second option in the league, which is interesting, a little higher than I thought he might be. But now we're going to go through the entire thing, starting with where they had Jimmy Butler. So we're going to go through the first, second, and third options as he had them ranked to talk about where the Heat fit with this. So let's start with the number 1 options. And I thought I got a chance to look at this right before we restarted the podcast here, and he retitles this "The Leading Men." What is it? Number 1, he's the team's alpha, often by personality, always by ability. Ideally, everyone recognizes he's the top dog on the squad. Teammates fall in line behind him, and opponents make him the primary focus of their game plans. Clutch situations typically run through your number 1. He settles you down when you're on the wrong end of a run. He bails you out if possessions go haywire. He gets his. I'm going to go through the list real quick before they get to the Heat's number 1. Jokic, Doncic, Giannis, all these foreign players taking over. Jason Tatum, don't get me started on that. I thought Derek White was their first option. Gilgeous-Alexander, there's no way I'm putting Tatum ahead of Shea, but whatever. 6,
Steph.
Curry, Victor Wembanyama.
Pretty high.
Victor Wembanyama, bit of a projection there. Ahead of Anthony Edwards. Ahead of Joel Embiid. Ahead of KD. I will say I'm not ready to go there, but okay. Jalen Brunson, 11. LeBron James, 12. Ja Morant, 13, then Donovan Mitchell, then Jimmy Butler, Zion Williamson, Kawhi Leonard, Tyrese Halliburton, Paolo Banchero, and De'Aaron Fox. I mean, okay, before we get to Jimmy specifically, I mean, this is a bit of a projection. If they got Victor that high with
For
Durant
sure.
here, right?
Yeah, there's no doubt. I also think that this may sound a little weird, but Joel Embiid, I don't know that I'd have him ranked this high necessarily. I think that he's hasn't proven enough late in the playoffs to necessarily be considered that high of a number one option. But I guess, he has put up MVP level numbers. I also think Ja Morant is a bit of projection as well. As you mentioned, that being kind of the theme here is looking ahead. Ja Morant being 13 overall, I think speaks to that. Jimmy fits in right about where I feel like he generally performs. Like there is that Jimmy Butler, the version of him where he goes nuclear and he rises up this list in a playoff series. But I think generally speaking, season over season, I don't necessarily disagree that Jimmy Butler's around 15.
I don't either. And honestly, I think the Heat would take that this year for the regular season. If Jimmy ended up being the 15th best number one option, clearly there will be questions on whether you can pay that guy close to $60 million a year going forward. But I think it's better than he was last year. I mean, that indicates more availability. Look, there are two different things here, and I don't know that Ben's necessarily taking the playoffs into account. In the playoffs, I would take Jimmy above a lot of guys that are ahead of him on the list, provided that Jimmy got to the playoffs healthy and was engaged. But as far as what he did in the regular season last year, there are guys below him that had better seasons. I mean, again, the Victor thing that's a lot for a guy. What did they win? 23 games or something like that? Like that's a lot. Okay, to put him up there. I'm not arguing that Victor's going to get there. I mean, he probably will get there eventually. It's not going to be this year. But I'm looking at some of the guys below him. I mean, Tyrese did more for the Pacers last year in the regular season than Jimmy did for the Heat, right?
Yep. And got them further in the playoffs and the mid-season tournament. Don't forget about that high achievement.
Right. And I mean, looking below here, I mean, look, I mean, there's some sad sack teams here. I mean, look at the last. Let's look the last 10. I mean, Trae Young at 21. That's not so bad, although they can't seem to give him away. Markkanen at 22. Scotty Barnes at 23. I actually think Scotty comes up a little bit this year. Cade Cunningham, who's better than his circumstances, but they don't win very much. LaMelo Ball. He doesn't play more than 40 games anyway, typically. Zach LaVine, they played better without him last year. Anthony Simons, that's Portland's number one option, I guess. Go Crow.
Also, Jalen Green being the next guy. I don't know that he's Houston's number one option, but that's a conversation for another day.
Is it Sengun, I guess?
But that's a weird team there that I mean, Fred VanVleet, what's he doing? Like, I don't know.
Yeah. I'm not sure. And then Kyle Kuzma, we've talked about, and then Cam Thomas is the number one option for the Nets, which means a lot of 32-point games, and then but not a lot actually accomplished there. I mean, they have him behind Donovan Mitchell, Morant coming back from injury. It kind of feels like, and Kawhi's a couple spots behind him, and Zion's one spot behind him. It kind of feels like, again, because you don't know about availability with Butler, Kawhi, and Zion, that's why they're placed 15 through 17. But if they're available, I might put them ahead of some of the guys that are in front of them. That's kind of where I would come to it. But again, if he's the number 15, number one guy in the regular season, the Heat are probably okay to make the back end of the playoffs.
Yep. They can get to the 6th seed if he is that consistently for enough games in the regular season. Particularly
right. So
when we explain when we talk about the second option.
Yeah, I agree with it. All right, so let's get to the one, because this is the one that jumped. Because here's the thing: if Jimmy's the 15 number one option, but Bam is where they placed him at the number 4, number 2 option, this team's definitely making the playoffs
for sure.
Okay,
this is optimistic. So, is he a Heat fan? Maybe we need to reach out to him, get him on the show.
I think he might be. So let's go through the list. You had it right in front of you. I'm trying to locate it myself right now. They had him as a number 4. The number 1 option was Anthony Davis, correct? Number 1, number 2 option.
Devin Booker.
Then Devin Booker, Jaylen Brown. Can you make any argument that Bam is ahead? And I know we have to take defense into consideration here for sure. But as a number 2 offensive option, I can't make a case that Bam is ahead of Anthony Davis, Devin Booker, or Jaylen Brown, right?
No, and also Jaylen Brown, Finals MVP. Like if I was on the side of the Celtics, which I'll never be, it's hard to argue with somebody who just accomplished that. So I see that. I think it's interesting the way that Davis, Booker, and Brown all became second options and how guys evolve into that role and accept it. Anthony Davis playing on a team with LeBron, I feel like that's like you automatically accept that. Devin Booker has given up usage in Phoenix, so it's valid there. Jaylen Brown has always been kind of neck and neck with Jason Tatum, which they had him as the number 1 option in this article. I think Bam is at a great spot here because he basically is the perfect fit for most alpha number 1 scoring options because he does all the other things, doesn't necessarily need the ball, but when he gets the ball can also be productive.
And it also tells you how the NBA has changed here a little bit because we came from a big 3 era, right? Where teams are building big 3s. And now in a lot of these teams, it's kind of hard to even get to a big 2. I mean, the way that some of these things have been spread out, and the second apron is going to lead to even more of this, where it's going to be very
what
hard.
The league wanted.
Exactly, where these guys are spread out around the league. But let's go to some of the guys that are below Bam here, because again, I think that Ben is showing a lot of respect to Bam, which typically this is happening more now. It's interesting what happens with the Olympics, that there's a new perspective on what Bam provides to the Miami Heat.
2-time gold medalist.
Which we were not seeing before, because there are some guys on this list who've actually, from an offensive standpoint, have far exceeded Bam in previous years. I mean, Jamal Murray won a championship as a number 2 option. Bam hasn't done that yet. He's 5th on this list, although he looked awful in the Olympics. Sabonis, who actually is part of this series, this Netflix series that Jimmy's also a part of.
He's crumbled in the playoffs, though, so he definitely deserves to be behind Bam. Although offensively, you could argue he's a better player than Bam, but not when the game.
You can argue it, Greg, but Sabonis has been put ahead of Bam in a lot of these categories. So the fact that he is actually put there is appropriate, but not always common. Kyrie's 7th. You know, I'm not the biggest Kyrie fan, but they did just get to the finals with him as a number 2 option. Things have worked out better in Dallas than they worked out other places. Karl Anthony Towns, the number 2 option in Minnesota, but the injury last year, he took more of a back seat to Anthony Edwards, right?
And this is one of those where the gentleman who wrote the article said, the worst thing is when your number 2 option thinks he's the number 1 option. This is a situation with Karl Anthony Towns where I think they haven't necessarily hashed that out between Anthony Edwards, even if we've all hashed it out. I don't know that they have.
Well, they've hashed it out at the podium because Anthony Edwards treats him like the rookie. It's kind of funny to see although he does pump him up. So, Anthony Edwards has a very Jimmy-like style to him, but it's kind of, I guess, is the words. I don't. If I use the word sweeter, what are people going to think? It's a little kinder and more jovial than Jimmy's approach, and since they both
a
have
little
had to
bit
deal
more
with
loose
Cat,
and positive is some of the savageness that Jimmy can bring.
Exactly. And then number 9, Siakam, who I actually think will be more of the number 1 option with Indiana this year, and then number 10, and this is where it gets interesting. They have Dame 10th. They have Maxey 11th. Then Jaren Jackson, Jalen Williams, who I love as a player, but and then Randall, Ingram, Harden, Franz Wagner, Sengun, Garland, Miles Bridges down the list. But having Bam 6 spots ahead of Dame, 7 spots ahead of Maxey, I don't know that most casual fans would say that.
No, the Dame one is interesting because think about this, Heat fans. When we all thought that Dame Lillard was signed, sealed, and delivered to Miami, we thought he would be in the very first portion of this episode with the ones, and he would be among the top ones, and Jimmy would have slid to twos and Bam into the threes. And so I think it's really interesting to in Milwaukee, he goes from being perceived as a guy that would be a home run on the number ones list to now being part of the number twos and being 10th on that list.
Yeah, and he probably would have been the number one option offensively with Miami. Whether or not he would have been classified that way in something like this, I'm not sure. Kind of depended again on how available Jimmy would have been. Jimmy's availability might not have been a big deal last year if Dame had been on the roster, right? Because they probably would have done better in the regular season. Of course, Dame wasn't available at certain times when they needed him last year. But I come back to this, okay? Bam has always been, as we've talked about it, the Heat's floor. But being the number 4 second option projects him as more than a floor. It projects him as a ceiling raiser for the team. And all I'll say on that is that it has to be consistent. Okay. In other words, it can't be one of these things, and we've talked about this many times, but that trails off over the course of the season. I don't want to get in a situation where we're really excited about Bam for the first 2-3 months, and they're like, where the hell did that go after the All-Star break? They have to figure out a way to manage it so that he can sustain and still be as effective. But I'll say this. If he's that many spots ahead of Tyrese Maxey this year, again, we're talking about the Heat being in a different category than I think we've discussed them in previously. But the most interesting one comes next. So we'll get to that one in a second. Before we do, we're trying to squeeze in this episode because literally, we're battening down the hatches here. This isn't going to be much in South Florida. I mean, everybody panics. My daughter's school's already canceled for tomorrow. They got a drop of rain. They don't go to school here anymore. We used to trek in the snow in Long Island, 24 inches of snow, and we'd be at school the next day. These days, this doesn't happen.
How many miles in the snow, Ethan?
How many miles? But here's the thing, okay? This is the perfect time for this sponsor because we talk all the time about water cleanup in Florida, right? Now is the time, right? You're probably gonna have a leak tomorrow. I just want to tell you that, just so you wake up and you're not surprised. And as soon as you do, you should reach out to Water Cleanup of Florida, your one-stop water and mold cleanup shop. From the very first leak all the way through the process. You should have gotten into preventative maintenance at this point, but whatever. Okay, you screwed up. That's fine. We can look past it. Still reach out to Michael Robert and his team based in Boca Raton, but service the entire Tri-County area. They'll probably be out on the west coast of Florida too if those folks need help because they did that for Fort Myers. But reach out to them. Water Cleanup of Florida. Again, it's WCUFL.com. That's WCUFL.com. If they can't do the job, they will tell you. That's one of the great things about them as a contractor because not all contractors are quite that honest. But reach out to them. Water Cleanup of Florida, WCUFL.com. If you've got the schmutz, they've got
guts.
Guts. There you go. All right, we threw it in. See, I'm used to you not being on with me on some of these now, so I have to have it. Brady never jumps in there. Anyway, he has no guts. Do you want to read the list of the number 3s?
Let's do it. I am not prepared here, obviously, because
that's okay. But I want to preface this by saying that when he introduces the paragraph, he talks about the number 3 guy being someone who accepts his role.
Yep. He says, what is a number 3? He's still a star, at least on a good team, but he's sacrificing some faction of his game for the greater good of the team. He usually leans into his greatest skill, whether that is flame-throwing threes or defending. Ideally, it is both, and you ask more from your third star. And if you ask more, he answers the call. So with that balance of downsizing your role, Paul George comes in at number 1, which I think as a fresh face in Philly probably was pretty – he's going from being the number 2, maybe – number 1-ish guy in LA to the number 3 guy in Philadelphia. Rudy Gobert at number 2. I mean, I guess defensively and as a number 3 guy, that makes sense, but I've never been a fan. Porzingis at 3. I think that's really high, but they're biased that I would, if the Heat win the championship, I want them to get biased as well. I'm blasting through this list here. We'll get to the important part in a minute. Chet Holmgren at 4 is probably warranted. Do you disagree with any of these yet? Desmond Bane 5. I feel like it's pretty chalk for the most part.
Yeah, there's no one in particular that I can disagree with some of the order. I'm not going to disagree with some of the ones who are at the top. I want to read it again just so people understand what he's trying to get at here. What is the number 3? He's still a star, at least on a good team, but he is sacrificing some faction of his game for the greater good of the team. He usually leans into his greatest skill, whether that is flame-throwing threes or defending like crazy. Ideally, it is both. And if you ask more from your third star, he answers the call. There is a balance to downsizing your role and remaining as efficient as ever. And it is the third star's responsibility to strike it. Think of Kevin Love on the 16 Cleveland Cavaliers. He arrived from a lottery team in Minnesota where he was the number 1, but transitioned into a 3-and-D weapon behind LeBron and Irving. I'm going to cite an even better example since I used to make this comparison all the time. Chris Bosh was the best number 3 player in the league for the entire time that he was with the Miami Heat with LeBron and Dwayne during those 4 years. And again, Kevin struggled with it at times, but then kind of accepted that role in Cleveland. It is really hard to do. And we've talked all the time about it is always the third guy that teams ask for, and that in the past, the Heat have moved to change the tenor of a build. Okay, change the structure of a build, whether it was Mashburn or Eddie Jones, etc. So this is the key point here as you go through this. Okay, he talks about owning the role. All right, number 1, Paul George. We don't know if he's going to own the role right now. He's never been a number 3. He's been a number 1 or a number 2 his entire career. Whether it was OKC, Indiana, he was the clear number 1. With the Clippers, he was supposed to be kind of a co-number 1. Obviously, those guys were hurt a lot. We don't know if he's going to own his role, but by talent alone, I understand why he's at the top of this list. Rudy Gobert does not really own his role necessarily. But again, they talk about being really good at one thing. He is, okay? I don't necessarily think it should earn him Defensive Player of the Year. I can understand him being in the top 5. Porzingis, I liked what he did last year. He's not healthy enough for me, typically, but I'm okay. They won a championship, number 3. Holmgren is a bit of a projection. I don't even know that he's the number 3. He might be the number 2 this year. I'd Jalen him. One or the other would be number 2, right? So I'm not even sure, but I'm okay with him there. Bane, a bit of a projection because, again, Ja's coming back. So we'll see how that plays out. Mobley, I still think he's overrated. I don't think he's emerged into what they expected. DeMar as a number 3, he's typically been a number 1 or 2. We're assuming he's going to own his role. He's never been in this role before. So, again, we'll see. Then the rest. Draymond, who I think is a number 3, you could have put him in the top 3 for years because you talk about owning his role defensively, things he has to do. And I still think when he's right, he's that high.
And Mikal Bridges was 8 by the Knicks.
Oh, yeah. Okay. And that's fair, but he's been pushed into a number 1 role in the past couple of years. He's better suited for this role that he had in Cleveland. Excuse me, not in Cleveland, Phoenix. Miles Turner, 10. Okay. Chris Middleton, we've been higher than that in recent years. At times, he's been the number 2 guy on that team. He's not as healthy as he was before. DeJounte Murray, we'll see. He kind of was in the number 2 role with Atlanta. Van Vliet, hard to, like you said, the Houston team's hard to figure out. Bradley Beal, 14. You're not worth all that money to be 14th as a number 3. Kobe White, Jalen Johnson, Brandon Miller, which is a projection, but he showed that this year. Michael Porter Jr., Klay Thompson, Jalen Suggs, and then Tyler Herro. Why do you think he's that low? Because the only players beneath him are Reeves, Zubac for the Clippers. Well, they've fallen far. Emmanuel Quickly, who just got the contract with the Raptors, and then a bunch of bad teams here, right? Cam Johnson, Malcolm Brogdon on Washington. You could have asked me 20 times. I would not have guessed where Malcolm Brogdon is right now. Jeremy Sochan with the Spurs, John Collins with Utah. These are all lottery teams. Jaden Ivey with Detroit, and Scoot Henderson in his second year with Portland. The only guy above, and is basically talking about, I guess, the Clippers. Well, Herro at 21, Reeves at 22, Zubac at 23, and then it is starting with Toronto and Quickly, pretty much lottery teams. Why is Tyler considered on the best? He's basically, he and Reeves of the decent teams in the league, because I think the Lakers are decent, not good. They're kind of in the Heat's. They could be better. We'll see if everybody's healthy, right? Why is Tyler so low?
This is really interesting. So Jimmy, to recap, before I go into the Tyler Herro thing, Jimmy's 15th. And we said if he finishes 15th in the regular season, the Heat are going to be okay. Bam ranked 4th. even if some say he's ranked a little high based off of what he's achieved as a Heat homer, I'm fine with that. We're running with that.
Mhm.
Then you look at this, and Tyler at 21. It has to do with that what he does great. He's not doing it often enough and great enough to offset what he's not doing so great. But I mean, for Jalen Suggs to be a spot ahead of him, I feel like Jalen Johnson has not necessarily like produced at a level long enough to clearly be ahead. And isn't he ranked ahead of him, or am I
Yeah.
messing up the list now?
No, well, Jalen Johnson is considered number 2. So they actually got Jalen Johnson in the top 15. Oh, you're talking about for Atlanta. I'm sorry.
Yeah.
I've always mixed the two of them. So Jalen Johnson for Atlanta, they have him. I'm sorry. Yes, 16th. 16th. I'm sorry. I was thinking OKC. So yeah, Jalen Johnson, they have him 16th. Brandon Miller, 17th. Porter Jr. Okay, so let's go through them one by one then. All right. I'm not necessarily you can't put him ahead of Draymond with what Draymond's accomplished,
No,
right?
I get that.
Miles Turner fit into that role last year, did a really good job in the postseason. Vance, the Middleton has a track record as a number 2. Again, health, age are a concern there. DeJounte Murray, I mean, it's fair.
Yeah, you
We'll
can't
see what
really
his role is.
argue it. I mean, you're splitting hairs.
Van Vliet's making $40 million. Again, I don't know what the pecking order in Houston will be. Bradley Beal's making even more than that. I don't know that Bradley Beal was better than Tyler Herro last year when both
But they're
players
in the
were
same
healthy.
for 1 year, and we're talking about next
Mhm,
season. They're in the same
mhm.
ballpark, right?
Right, fair. Kobe White had I think, a really good breakout season last year. Tyler's done more over the course of his career.
Big time.
Jalen Johnson, they played well with him taking a more prominent role last year. Brandon Miller has all-star potential. It may not happen this year.
Yeah.
Michael Porter Jr. they've won a championship with Michael Porter Jr. as their fourth option, I guess. Him or Gordon
Yeah.
was their
They've got
third.
they had some luxuries on that roster for a while.
They did, to the point that Porter could basically average 7 points a game in the finals. He didn't average much more than Tyler, and Tyler didn't play. And then Klay Thompson, who historically would be much higher, but was not great in Golden State last year. He had some moments, and then he was awful in that play-in game. And Jalen Suggs, I guess, right ahead of Tyler.
Yeah, I don't
Suggs a
see
better
that.
defender than Tyler. Tyler's a better scorer.
Yeah, and Tyler's accomplished more. I think that this list is biased a bit, but Tyler's not far off. Like, let's just say all things break right. Tyler maybe can move up 4 spots.
Okay. But isn't a lot of it about accepting the role? Because I kind of feel like he talks about leaning into what you do well, right?
Yep. Lead the
And with
league in
Tyler,
3-point shooting, Tyler.
he can. Don't you think that if he was doing more spot up stuff, right? More off the ball stuff, that Tyler Herro could shoot 40% from 3 on high volume?
Mm-hmm. Absolutely.
I think that's really what this is about. I think if he leans into that, and we're going to talk about this ad nauseum, and I know he doesn't like when people talk about this because he has other things in his bag. He has another part of his skill set. He's not just a spot up shooter. But I do think if you're talking about the role that they need to space in the starting lineup, if he's going to be in the starting lineup, then you can make a case he would be higher on this list if he was doing that at that kind of clip. And that's, I think, one of the things that if he's going to be a starter this year, they are going to try to lean into. So let's close with this. And we thank our sponsors, Water Cleanup of Florida. Call them right now as everything starts to flood. Also, Better Edge, use the code 5RSN. Prize Picks, use the code 5. If they have Jimmy at 15, Bam at 4, and Tyler at 21, what's their seed in the East?
I think they can get to 6 because Jimmy and Bam are more important than the Tyler situation.
You know why I think one of the reasons they could is because, again, it comes down to fit, is I think if you put Rozier and Jaquez as your 4th and 5th options, I think those two can be higher on the list than Tyler's being given credit for as a number 3.
And we haven't ranked the coaches.
No, that's true. That's true. Well, I'm pretty sure where he's going to rank. But again, it's up to that coach to figure out a way to maximize the number 3 option so that the number 3 option ranks higher than 21 on this list. As long as he's on the roster, that's a coach's job. He's got to maximize. He's got to figure out how to make all these things work, and that's one of the things we're talking about in the podcast. All right, we did 30 minutes. We're getting out of here before all the internet goes. By the way, Alex was supposed to be on this episode, but he's disappeared into an internet fog. So he'll be on an episode here in the future, as will Brady. Again, everything leads up to our content coming up here on Monday. Make sure you subscribe to Off the Floor. Have a good one, everybody.
Thank you for listening to the 5 on the Floor on the 5 Reasons Sports Network. After all, someone needs to listen to my dad.